I know you've got an ear out for the start of the podcast, but before we jump into today's episode, I wanted to remind you to keep an eye out for Darrell Lee's limited edition Christmas treats, because they're in stores now. Like the iconic Christmas nougat pudding, so yummy and a gorgeous little gift. And some delicious Chrissy-themed twists on your favourite treats, like the Darrell Lee Rockley Road with chewy red and green jelly pieces, green and red crunchy milk chocolate balls, my favourites, and green apple and strawberry flavoured licorice. Watch them disappear. Your Christmas treats table will pop with colour and scrumptiousness. Spread some joy, bring the fun, and enjoy the Christmas tradition that is Darrell Lee. Hurry before they sell out. Darrell Lee makes Christmas better. This is The 5 of My Life with me, Nigel Marsh. The series where I talk to notable people about 5 of their defining things. The way it works is my guests always choose a favourite film, book, song, place and possession. They tell me their choices in advance so I can research them, but they don't tell me why they've chosen them. That's the subject of our conversation. The reason I devised this series is I wanted to create a slightly different way to gain an insight into the real lives and thoughts of prominent people. As the face of the global slow movement, Carl is a man after my own heart. It was such a pleasure to get to know the personality behind the crusade in this conversation and learn how the slow movement started. So, Carl, welcome to 5 of My Life.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. Looking forward to it.
Ever since you and I shared a virtual podium in Slovenia, I have been looking forward to this. It's a small world, isn't it?
One of the glories of Zoomland, right?
Yeah, it's weird. It's sort of why would the Slovenian government be paying you and I to give a speech? But I'm very glad that they did.
As am I.
Now, on 5 of My Life, it's traditional that we start with our guest's film, and you've chosen Pope Francis's favourite film, no less. It's the first Danish film to win an Oscar for foreign language film, Babette's Feast, 1987. Tell us about that, Carl. Why did you choose that?
Wow, I didn't realize it was Pope Francis' favorite film. I'm going to guess that I like it for different reasons than he does. Well, I suppose I should give you a sort of potted summary, should I? It's set in it's in the 19th century, late 19th century. It's set in a remote, windswept, austere corner of northern Denmark, Jutland. And it's in a village of very religious place, a place where pleasure is regarded with great suspicion, and people are all about sort of the Lord and service to others and so on. And into this bubble of plainness and beigeness appears a French woman, an exile from Paris. We've just learned that she's, her family had been killed, and she's comes and spends time in this village. And she's there for 14 years, and she just sort of blends in, and she's kind of she works free as a servant and cooks. And then she, out of nowhere, wins the lottery in Paris and suddenly has this huge sum of money. And she plows it all into producing the most extraordinary feast. So this is a village where people live on gruel, right? And take a kind of perverse pleasure in eating pale brown fart food. And it's just completely joyless, right? The whole idea, they keep going on about how food is simply fuel to keep the body going in order to keep the soul going in order to pay homage to God. And so suddenly they are brought around the table for this explosive homage to sensual pleasure produced by this Parisian woman. It is the kind of, I found, I watched it, I guess I would have been in my early 20s at the time, and it was in the 80s. And it kind of took me back in a lot of ways to my own childhood, because food has been hugely important to me from day one. My parents are, card-carrying foodies, hugely interested in cuisine. And one of the things we always talked about sitting around the table was food. It was a source of great magic and music and happiness and bringing people together. I guess the film is about the transformative power of food, that it has so much more to offer us than recharging our physical batteries, that it's a kind of art, it's spiritual, it's a celebration, it's communal. We are never at, in my view, our most human and at our most transcendent than when we are breaking bread together. And that Babette's Feast film just brought all of that together to me in a way that was was extraordinary. And even thinking about it and talking about it now brings goosebumps to me.
And so are you a good cook, would you say?
I'm an avid cook. I mean, people seem to like my food. Food has carried on me. That's one of the great inheritances I've had from my parents, is that I love food. It's something that we talk about a lot in my own family and my children. I have passed that on to my kids, who are both huge amateur chefs. They're both away at university now, but that's one of the main things that we communicate. They send me photos of what they've been cooking, or if they've got an unusual vegetable in their box this week, they'll send a WhatsApp message saying, what can I do with this? Or what was the last thing you did with aubergine, and so on. So food is a leitmotif in our family, and it's something that links the generations. So even when my parents come to stay, they will cook with the grandchildren and go shopping to farmers markets together and so on. So it's like a drumbeat in our family. It's a thread that pulls us all together.
And where do you think your parents got that from? Is it what led to that?
I know where my mum got it from, because in a way, my father is from Mauritius, off the southeast coast of Africa, and it comes from an all singing, all dancing, hot climate, sensual culture. And my mum is almost like a kind of Miss Jean Brodie, right? She's from a sort of austere Presbyterian family. The food my mum grew up versus the food my father grew up were just, chalk and cheese, a little bit like Babette's Feast. And I suppose my father, now I think about it, I had not thought about it before. My father wandered into my mother's life a bit like Babette wandered into that Danish village and brought with him a love, a fire, an obsession with savoring, right? With flavor, with food, with the sensuality of the table. And I just infected my mom with that same bug. And together they've carried on just with that torch. So I've not seen that connection before, but now I have to tell my father I see him as the Babette of the family.
Now we're going to move to the 50s from the 80s for your second choice, Carl. You've chosen the Graham Greene novel, The Quiet American. Tell us why you chose that one.
Well, this is one of those books, maybe the book that, it's always funny. You look back on your life and pinpoint certain moments and turns and forks in the road and think, well, that's what pushed me here and brought me. And, one never really knows. But if I had to pick one book that really set the course for my life, it would be The Quiet American. This book is about a journalist who is in Vietnam just as the war is kicking off there in the 50s, 60s. And he meets a wild-eyed, idealistic American called Pyle. And it's really about the idea of intervening in other people's affairs. It's kind of a meditation on whether that actually works. And there's a love story, there's a love triangle and so on. But I guess I think that I was at that point when I read the book, I identified myself with Pyle, who is the idealistic American who believed that you could go in there and help other people. And then I encountered this Fowler character, the journalist, who was a little older, a bit more cynical, and didn't really believe you could help people in that way, that you would stumble in and do more harm than good. And that those twin beacons, innocence and idealism, can lead you into some pretty dark places. And that's sort of what happens in the book. And I guess I came away from that book thinking, I want to be of service, but not in the Pyle mode. I want to be of service somehow by writing about the world, by just being a witness to it, which is kind of what Fowler did. He went out and just told the world what he saw, what he heard, what he understood to be going on around him. And that was really a spark for the first bit of my career. And in a way, what I've always been, which is a journalist. I came away from that book thinking, I want to write about the world to make it a better place. And I think The Quiet American took me there.
And was this before you worked with the Street Kids, or is it after? I read in your bio, sounds amazing. You were working with Street Kids in Brazil, is that right?
It was around the same time. I think it may have been slightly afterwards. Because I worked with street children in Brazil for a time. And that also pushed me towards wanting to do the right thing, to help and so on. And I grew up, as I said before, in a comfortable, middle-class Canadian family. We wanted for nothing. It was safe. It was secure. It was like, growing up in a womb. And then suddenly to be thrust at the age of, the first time I went, I guess I was probably 18, 19. And then I went back again at age of 21. into this raucous, chaotic, frightening world of vivid, Hieronymus Bosch, almost like violence, visited often upon children. It was just rocked me to my core and foundations. And that really also fueled the idea of doing something. I wanted to do something. And I guess all around that time, and then now I think about it, was probably Graham Greene I read shortly after that, just sort of crystallized this idea of a desperate fire in my belly to do something about this. Then the book pointing the way to the how I could do it was with words and bearing witness on the page.
And tell us a bit about your journalism career for those who are not familiar with it. I mean, you're very well known for obviously the slow movement, but pre-slow, you're a very eminent, respected journalist. But tell us about that.
Once I worked out that this is what I wanted to do, I started out in Edinburgh because I went to university in Edinburgh. Having grown up in Canada, born in Edinburgh, went back to Scotland, did my university there. And so that was the obvious place to start off in journalism. So I just started freelancing, and for anyone who would take my stuff on anything going. And then I began writing, getting sent abroad to do things around Europe. But I always knew I wanted to go back to South America. And so I did. I would have gone to Brazil, but Brazil was crawling with freelance journalists at the time. And so I looked elsewhere, and I ended up going to Buenos Aires in Argentina, bought a one-way ticket with a rucksack. I didn't know anyone there, and just literally flew out, and all kinds of adventures, got myself on my feet, and then spent 3 years based there covering South America for The Economist, The Observer, the Miami Herald. Came back to London after 3 years and covered Europe for the Houston Chronicle, and then a Canadian paper, the National Post. And that was a time when I really felt that, I don't know, I guess you feel like there's a kind of confluence of factors in your life. And it felt like I was in the zone. And it just felt like I was doing the right thing. I was making a difference. And then towards the end of my journalistic chapter, I felt like, it's partly the world of the media shifted, and there was less money for the kind of journalism I wanted to do, which was reportage, taking time to go and spend, getting to understand what was happening in a place, to get beneath the skin. That began to seem, I think, in the media, the global industrial media complex, to seem like a luxury or a waste of time and money, and everything sped up. Suddenly you didn't have 3 days to go off and investigate a story. You had to write it in 3 hours, right? Or you were tweeting about it. And I just began to feel that in my earlier part of my career, I felt like I was on the bleeding edge of what was happening in the world. I was bearing witness. I felt making a difference at some level. I began to feel like I'd just become a wing of the infotainment industrial complex somehow. And I wasn't really moving the dial at all. I was going through the motions. And so that really laid the groundwork for the next move, which was away from journalism into writing books.
For your third choice, we are going back to the 80s, Carl. You've chosen the seventh and last single from Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA album, My Hometown. Tell us about that.
I love that song. And the first time I heard it, it just blew me away. It's a story of a small town. It's a little boy or a man looking back on his childhood and remembering, running to pick up the paper for his dad, and being and then the racial tension in town, the growing up, the coming of age, and then the leaving his town as the town died and withered on the vine, and remembering and telling his own son, in the beginning of the song, his dad drives through town with him on his lap and tells him, remember, this is your hometown. And in the end of the song, he's doing the same as he leaves that town to his own son, saying, remember, this place, this is your hometown. And the song just means so many things to me because I'm an expat. I left my hometown. And so it's a very poignant and kind of wistful journey for me every time I listen to it, because it takes me back to my own feelings of leaving a place that was me, that marked me, that made me, which was Canada, and that complex, tangled relationship that you always have as an expat with the place you left. You almost end up having a kind of love-hate relationship, or you feel guilty for leaving. There are all kinds of things that are tied up with it. It's one of those songs that I often will, in the middle of the day, if I just feel I need to tap into some kind of deeper reservoir of feeling or meaning somehow, I'll just sometimes put it on and I'll put on different versions of it. There's versions on the YouTube where he's singing it live and it brings a different vibe and a different poetry to it. But there's another angle to my hometown as well, which is that when I became a father and discovered that you don't get to sleep anymore in the early years and you're always being woken up by howling, mewling infants, and you have to get up and, soothe them in the middle of the night. And I found myself singing My Hometown to both my children in those early years. And it was the song that soothed them. It became a kind of lullaby. So in many, many hundreds, probably thousands of nights, I have found myself with one of my two children cradled in my arms, singing very softly to them Bruce Springsteen's My Hometown. And so there's a kind of, there's a sort of symmetry to that it was me leaving my hometown, leaving the cradling arms of my own childhood and trying to bring some of that back by singing it to my children in the dead of night and so on. And so it's a song that sometimes we play. We don't often play it. It's not part of our family soundtrack when we're in the car going somewhere. But when you asked me to think about songs, it was an easy choice for me to pick that song. But I had not really talked to my children about that song before, but I sent them a YouTube clip of him singing this song. It was in a live version, which I found particularly affecting. And it was amazing. They both wrote back to me right away and said, God, I remember this. It's so funny, but I know this song so well, right? It's sort of, it's there, filed away in a deep, loving archive somewhere. So I just love this idea of, we started off talking about Babette's Feast and the leitmotif of food passing through the generations. I see that song doing something very similar, sort of weaving together me with them, our generations, and perhaps they will pass it on in some different format to my grandchildren and their kids one day.
We're moving on to your fourth choice, your place, which is an outdoor rink, and I'm imagining that's a skating rink in Edmonton, Alberta. Tell us about that, Carl.
That is my happy place. It's in Western Canada, that part of Canada, it's very cold, right? So you have outdoor rinks, which are, you get the boards and just grass in the middle. And then for all of the long winter months when it's below zero, the rink is flooded and you have free outdoor ice to skate on. Usually one of the rinks in every neighborhood has two rinks, and one is for just general skating, the other is for hockey. And these two rinks were a 3-minute walk from my house, right? Just the end of our street. And I just lived there. It was the place that all my changes were there. From that famous song, Neil Young, there's a town in North Ontario. All my changes were there. I kind of feel like that hockey rink, all my changes were there. It was where I came of age. It's always where I tap into when I think of the unalloyed freedom and joy of growing up, of being young, of childhood. It's kind of where I began to work out who I was, what kind of person I was. And then, of course, when I left, it's that link to my Canadian roots, right? I live in London now in England, but I've carried on playing hockey, right? I played ice hockey here for 12 years. Recently, I switched over to ball hockey, which is the same sport, but without the ice. So you play on with shoes and a ball, but everything is the same otherwise. And all the people I play with are expat Canadians, right? So it's my one moment. Everything else in my life is very English. My family are all English, my neighbor, my circle, everything. But my hockey that's my going back to my hometown, if you like, right? Is that rink. And there's so many, it's got other moments in my life. I went back about, I think 3 years, about the third year of university, I went back and worked a construction job in Edmonton, went back from Edinburgh for the summer. And then I ended up just through fluke being put on a crew that rebuilt the rink right beside my house, right? It was just complete coincidence.
The same one.
Exactly the same one. And so I tore down the outdoor shack made of breeze blocks that I had grown up in, my toes getting frostbite, coming in to warm up my fingers before going out to play again when it's 30 below, right? I tore that down with my own hands, right? And then rebuilt it over a summer, and we rebuilt the rink. And it was just, I feel almost a little bit weepy now thinking of it. And so it just felt like the gods of whatever were just vouchsafing a little something to me, a token of memory, or a reminder, or just a little top up of the joy I'd had before. And And I say now, projecting way into the future, whenever anyone says, where do you want your ashes scattered? That's where I want my ashes scattered. I want them scattered at center ice in the ice hockey rink of that Aspen Gardens. Was my community league.
That's fantastic. I went to a ice hockey game in Canada as a young boy. It's incredibly violent. Would I just have a bad experience, or the people on the they were beating each other up?
People used to say, I went to a fight and an ice hockey game broke out, right? It was a lot more violent. I mean, a lot of punch-ups and stuff in the past. It's become less so. But it is a rough sport. It is a tough sport. It is not a sport. I've now got very much into football, soccer right here. And just the different cultures. I mean, I can't, the way that footballers, if you brush against them, their shoulder, they flop in the air like wounded divas and roll around in excruciating pain on the floor if you mess up their gelled hair, that kind of thing in hockey culture, that just wouldn't happen, right? I mean, if a hockey player can't get up from the ice, it's because he cannot get up, right? So it's a very different culture. And that's actually something that my son is a huge and a very, very good football player. But that's something I've passed on to him. I tried to get him to play hockey, and he's learned to rollerblade and stuff, but it's hard to get those things to jump the generation in different countries like this. But I have passed on that ethos of hockey, that you do not feign injury. You do not pretend to be hurt. You stay on your feet.
Good on him.
But actually, just to round out the idea of ice hockey, no, it is rough, but it is also a game of rare and exquisite poetry. I mean, there's so much finesse. And I'm actually not a kind of rough player at all. I'm the kind of person who's trying to avoid getting hit. I'm a playmaker and a scorer. And I love the geometry and the music of the game, which is a hymn to me.
You wrote wonderfully and I know I shouldn't have favorites, but my favorite of your books is Boulder. I just thought it was a sensational book. But that started with a story about you struggling with the challenges of getting slightly older and maybe not being at the peak of your game.
Yeah, well, that was again, as I said before, a personal existential crisis. Boulder started off when I was at a hockey tournament up in the north of England. My team were in the quarterfinals, and it was 1-1, and we were struggling to beat a team that we had annihilated the year before. And then out of nowhere, I scored an amazing goal. It's off a face-off. If anyone knows anything about hockey, it's a difficult, rare kind of goal to score. And I scored it. And it was just one of those amazing, kind of life-affirming moments. And we were all going crazy, and my team was propelled into the semifinals. And I came off the floor floating on air. And then one of the organizers in the dressing room came up to me, and he was looking at player profiles. And he just said, I don't know where he said, it turned out that I was the oldest player there. And I knew that I was one of the oldest, right? I'm not in denial. I mean, most of the players there are my son's age, right? They're in their 20s or their 30s. But I somehow being the oldest, I don't know, I felt that my blood running cold in my veins, and suddenly all these questions began crowding in on me. I was thinking, well, are people laughing at me? Do I look out of place here? Should I take up a different, more age-appropriate pastime like bingo, maybe, right? And I got nothing against bingo, but I prefer hockey, right, for now anyway. And it was so strange because the important thing was that I was playing well, I was having fun. And yet somehow, all of a sudden, my chronological age had landed on my head like an iron anvil, right? It had become this huge burden on my back. It had become something that made me ashamed, and began to question whether I should be doing the thing that I loved and could do well. And I don't know, it shook me down to my roots. And I came away from that tournament thinking, why? Why do we feel so guilty, so afraid, so ashamed? Why do we lie about our age? Why has it got this terrible power over us, our chronological age? And is there a different story to tell about aging? One that would make me feel okay about being the oldest player to tournament. Actually, not just okay, but proud of it, right? And that was kind of the spark and the starting point for writing Boulder. But yeah, it's true. Yeah, that also, the hockey was woven in there as well.
The fifth and final choice on Five of My Life is often my favourite. It's the possession. People tend to get quite personal with this, and you've chosen an art pencil wrap. Could you tell us why, but could you describe it first?
It's a gift from my wife. It's a kind of canvas wrap that folds over. It probably wraps up sort of 3 times, and then there's a little buckle on it. You open it up, and it just splays out an array of pencils and little charcoal pieces and a couple of erasers and so on. The kind of thing that artists would have used, for decades, centuries, possibly in different forms. I really struggled at first, actually. It was funny when you asked for me to choose a possession. My first reaction was how am I going to do that? Well, do I pick a hockey stick? I'm just so uninterested in possessions. And whenever that dinner party parlor joke or question comes up, what would you save if you were running out of your burning house? I could never really think of anything because there's just nothing that I couldn't replace that I cherish that much as an object, to be honest. And then I thought, well, actually, I probably would reach for my canvas art pencil bag because it's got so many good associations. There's little nicks on it and it's clean and tidy as it was before because it's lived along with me. And I'd want to remember some of those little traces that have been left behind and feel its heft and its weave again in my hand. And I'm not an artist by any stretch of anybody's imagination. I'm terrible at drawing. In fact, it's a kind of family joke how bad I am at drawing. But I love drawing, right? I love sketching. And it ties into really what I suppose in some ways what many people have called my life's work, which is the idea of slowing down. And what sketching does, what drawing an object does, is that it forces you, it invites you, but it also forces you to do something that very few of us ever do nowadays in this media-drenched, multitasking culture of distraction and instant gratification, which is it forces you to pause, be still, and to look and observe at one thing, right? To be present in a way that I think very few of us manage to do nowadays. And so for me, it's the ultimate act of slow with a capital S. It's a kind of meditation. And I find that I don't often draw things that anybody would ever want to look at, but it's just the moment. It's about shifting into a different mode, a different way of being. It's like slipping in a chip into your head and blocking out the sound and fury that swirls around us in daily life of distraction and stimulation and saying, I am going to be here in this moment now, and I'm going to inhabit it and feel it out and make sense of it fully. And so I don't take it everywhere with me. And sometimes I just have a pencil and in my pocket and I'll do a little sketch. But I know that when I reach for that canvas bag, just to feel the rough texture of it in my hand, I know I can feel that I am on my way to a moment of serenity, to a place of tranquility, to a kind of reconnection with myself and the world around me. And I know that I'm going to open it out, choose a pencil, and the rest of the world is just going to melt away into insignificance and background nothingness. And I'm just going to be.
You can't be speeding up and distracted by distraction and multitasking if you're trying to get the angle of that roof correct. You just have to patiently observe and zone in.
There's a kind of simplicity and minimalism about drawing as well, that it comes down just simply to you, the pencil, and the line that you're trying to capture. And I think in a world of spiraling complexity and constant distraction, that is such a bomb, isn't it? Right? Such a gift just to switch into that very simple mode. And when all the work I do with slow, people so often say they come to it via minimalism or simplicity, the simplicity movement, that it's about paring back, getting to the core of things, stripping away the fluff and the filler, and getting to the heart of the matter.
Are you an optimist, mate? I mean, in my life, I think my wife would say I'm too slow, but I don't buy into this. The whole point of life is going ever faster. But how do you think we're going generally? Is society getting on board with slow, or are you an outlier?
I'm less and less an outlier. I definitely was at the beginning. I felt like a voice in the wilderness, but I don't feel like that now. I just saw just one little data point here to share. I saw the other day that Google and YouTube had crunched the numbers looking at the number of views of videos on YouTube with the words slow living in the title. And over the last year, the number of views has gone up 400%. So I think it's just a reminder that this pandemic, which forced us to put on the brakes, has operated, I think, for a lot of people like a giant workshop in slowness, right? And of course, that doesn't mean that I welcome the pandemic. It's been a total nightmare for all of us in different ways. But I do think there's a silver lining here, that we've been forced to slow down long enough now that many of us have tasted the silver lining. We've seen that that less is more, that FOMO is absurd, that there is great magic and music to be had by slowing down, by being present. And I think that is something that's a kind of lesson that a lot of people, I think, will take forward from the pandemic. So I was optimistic about the prospects for the slow revolution before the pandemic. I'm even more optimistic now. I think that at the granular individual level, people are waking up to the folly of living in fast forward, trying to reconnect with their inner tortoise in lots of different ways. But I think also globally that the pandemic has been a moment to reset, reboot the world. And you're already seeing new ways of thinking about the role of the state, the environment, changing the way cities are structured so there's more space for cyclists, for instance, and pedestrians. So I think that the dial was already moving in favor of slow before. I think it will move more quickly in the years to come. Delicious irony there, but one to be embraced.
I think your work, not just on slow, but on parenting, on aging, it is sensational, mate. You are a real powerful force for good globally, and it's been just a delight to chat to you. There is one further trick question on Five of My Life. Who would you like to hear on Five of My Life next, Carl, and why?
I'm going to say this with slight apprehension and mixed feelings, but maybe Elon Musk.
Great. And why would you want to hear Musk's five?
I disagree with him about so many things, but I do find him a oddly enthralling figure. And so much of what he does seems to be aimed at the public arena. And then other times it seems wildly unfiltered. And I guess just from curiosity, I'd like to peel back the facade and get a sense of what's driving this person who has, by various means, placed himself in a hugely pivotal place in modern life and is massively influential. So I think it'll be useful for us to know more about what makes Elon Musk tick.
Challenge accepted. We will start the hunt as of tomorrow morning. Carl, this has been a total joy. I was looking forward to this for weeks, and thank you for coming on. And I wish you all love and success with your important work in the future.
Thank you so much. It's been a treat. It's been a joy, actually. I'm going to go away with much more to think about than I came into it with, which is always a good sign from an interview. So thank you. I've enjoyed it from start to finish. And I send you a big, warm, slow embrace from my pandemic bunker in London.
Fantastic. Keep sketching, mate.
Yeah, hopefully I'll keep getting better at it, even if very slowly.
Five of My Life was presented by me, Nigel Marsh. Producer, Alex Mitchell. Sound production and theme music by Darcy Thompson and Matt Nicholish.